I want to tell you the answer to that question right now, and I will in about 60 seconds. But I also want to tell you something more useful than just the answer. Because if you stay until the end of this video, I'm going to show you what the research actually points to as the closest thing we have to a complete defense against the diseases that kill most of us. Not a single exercise. A system. And the difference between knowing the winner and knowing the system is the difference between adding a year or two to your life and adding a decade. My name is Dr. Miles, 13 years in emergency medicine, 34 years old. And I have spent more time than I'd like to admit watching people arrive in my ER with bodies that gave out earlier than they should have. Bodies that were never trained. Bodies that sat still for 30 years while their owners felt perfectly fine. Here's what I know. Exercise does not extend life through magic. It works by acting on a small number of underlying processes that sit beneath almost every major disease that kills us. And before I tell you which exercise wins, I need to give you the scoring system, because without it, the answer won't make any sense. There are 4 processes worth knowing about. The first is cardiovascular fitness, how efficiently your heart and circulation move oxygen and blood around your body. The second is insulin resistance, when your cells stop responding properly to the hormone that controls blood sugar, which is the opening chapter of type 2 diabetes. The third is sarcopenia, the slow, invisible loss of muscle mass that begins in your mid-30s and accelerates with every passing decade unless you actively fight it. And the fourth is chronic inflammation, that low-grade, smoldering background fire that quietly feeds heart disease, cancer, and dementia over decades. Every form of exercise works on these 4 processes differently. That is what this entire comparison comes down to. Keep those 4 in your mind. We're going to come back to them. Number 1, resistance training, the insurance policy. Let me start with the one that is most underrated and the one I personally neglected for longer than I should have. Resistance training, lifting weights or working against your own body weight. Here is the honest truth about this one. On raw mortality numbers alone, it does not take the crown. But it protects something that nothing else can: your physical strength, your structural integrity, and your independence in the decades when you will need them most. Sarcopenia, that gradual loss of muscle, begins quietly in your mid-30s. Most people lose somewhere between 3 and 8% of their muscle mass per decade after that. You don't feel it happening. You feel fine. And then one day in your 60s, you notice that getting up from the floor takes a moment longer than it used to. And then in your 70s, that moment becomes an effort. And then in your 80s, it becomes something you can no longer do alone. Picture 2 people in their 50s. You probably know both of them because they exist in almost every social group. One of them is still mobile and strong. They garden. They carry things. They go on holidays. They move through the world with ease. The other one is slower, stiffer, less confident on their feet. Now stretch that gap out to their 80s. The first person is still living in their own home, still independent, still seeing people, still living. The second person is in a nursing home. That gap, the one you can already see beginning in people you know, was drawn decades earlier. Resistance training is what draws it in your favor. And muscle does something else that most people don't know. It is the largest site in the body for disposing of blood sugar. More muscle means more places for glucose to go after you eat, which directly improves insulin sensitivity and pushes back against diabetes. A 2022 review in the British Journal of Sports Medicine found that resistance training was associated with roughly a 15% lower risk of dying from any cause, with the sweet spot landing at just 30 to 60 minutes per week. 30 minutes. That is almost nothing. I'll be honest, I learned this the hard way, in the opposite direction. When I was younger, my mates and I were in the gym twice a day during holidays, training purely to get as big as possible. It worked. We got strong. But looking back from a longevity standpoint, it was completely over the top. A fraction of that effort would have delivered almost all of the health benefits. The minimum effective dose here is smaller than most people think, which means most people have no excuse not to meet it. Think of resistance training like this. Your muscles and bones are the chassis of a car. Cardio builds the engine. But a powerful engine in a rusted, failing chassis doesn't get you very far. Neglect the chassis for long enough, and it doesn't matter how good the engine is, the car stops moving. Resistance training is what keeps the chassis intact for the road ahead. Number 2, HIIT, the time-efficient amplifier. High-intensity interval training. Short, brutal bursts of maximum effort. Sprint, recover, sprint again. 30 seconds as hard as you can on a bike. 60 seconds rest, repeat. A full session in 10 to 15 minutes. HIIT is not really a separate category of exercise. It is a concentrated, more potent version of cardio, with some of the muscle-stimulating benefits of resistance work folded in. And it is extraordinarily efficient. Those short, intense bursts push your VO2, max your body's maximum oxygen uptake upward faster than steady-state cardio does, minute for minute. The intensity also triggers a powerful improvement in insulin sensitivity that can last for hours after the session ends. And it stimulates the cellular repair machinery in ways that gentler exercise simply doesn't reach. Think of HIIT like this. If steady cardio is a long, controlled burn in a furnace, reliable, consistent, producing heat hour after hour, then HIIT is a blast furnace. Ferocious, short, and capable of producing more heat in 10 minutes than the controlled burn does in an hour. Same fuel, completely different intensity. And the body adapts to the blast differently than it adapts to the slow burn. But there is an honest limitation here that I want to name directly. The long-term mortality data on HIIT specifically is not as deep or as mature as the decades of evidence we have on cardiovascular fitness generally. It is harder to study, and it hasn't been tracked across as many people for as long. And HIIT carries a real injury risk if you throw yourself into it unprepared. I've had niggles from this kind of training that stopped me running for months at a time. One of them I ignored for weeks because I told myself I was just being soft. I wasn't being soft. I had a stress injury that needed rest, and my stubbornness turned 2 weeks of recovery into 3 months. Don't be me on that one. And I'll add something I've noticed in the ER that doesn't get written about enough. The patients who come in with exercise-related injuries, pulled muscles, stress fractures, overuse problems are disproportionately people who jumped straight into high-intensity training with no base fitness underneath. HIIT on top of no foundation is like redlining an engine that hasn't been serviced. The power is there, but something gives way. HIIT is best understood not as a foundation, but as a powerful amplifier sitting on top of a solid base. Which brings us to that base and to the winner. Before we get to the winner, I started this channel because I kept seeing the same thing in the ER. People arriving with entirely preventable conditions, having never been given the actual information they needed to avoid them. This video is exactly that information. If you want more of it, subscribe now before we finish. It takes 1 second. Number 3, cardio, the winner. Traditional cardiovascular exercise, running, cycling, swimming, brisk walking uphill, sustained aerobic work at a pace you can hold for 30 minutes or more. This is the winner, and the evidence behind it is not close. In 2018, the Cleveland Clinic published a study of over 120,000 people who had undergone treadmill testing. Cardiorespiratory fitness was the single most powerful predictor of survival they measured. Stronger than smoking status, stronger than diabetes, stronger than high blood pressure. The least fit people in that study had roughly 4 times the risk of dying during the study period compared to the fittest people. 4 times. That is not a marginal finding. That is one of the strongest signals you will ever see in this kind of research. And yet nobody is selling you this. The fitness industry makes its money from complexity. From programs, from equipment, from supplements, from the idea that getting healthy requires something expensive and complicated. The actual evidence points to 3 sessions of brisk walking or jogging per week. That costs nothing. No gym membership, no equipment, no influencer, just you and a pair of shoes. The industry has a direct financial interest in making sure that simple truth gets buried under noise, and it mostly succeeds. In practical terms, moving from low fitness to a good level of fitness, not elite, just good, is associated with somewhere between 3 and 5 extra years of life. For the very fittest, the gap stretches wider still. Now picture 2 people again. Both completely sedentary, both starting from zero. One takes up resistance training, the other takes up running 3 times a week. The person lifting weights builds muscle and gains a small amount of cardiovascular fitness as a side effect. The person running gains an enormous amount of cardiovascular fitness, and on top of that, builds a meaningful amount of muscle through their legs, glutes, and core. Cardio gives you a large portion of what weights offer, almost as a bonus, while doing its primary job far better. That is the core reason it wins. What cardio builds above all else is your VO2 max, the maximum amount of oxygen your body can take in and use. It strengthens the heart muscle, so it pumps more blood with each beat. It grows new capillaries in your tissues. It pulls glucose out of the blood for fuel, directly reducing insulin resistance. And it chips away at systemic inflammation over time, that same smoldering fire that feeds the diseases that kill us. I want to add an honest nuance here, because the research is often quoted incompletely. The Cleveland Clinic study suggested there may be no upper limit to the benefits. That is not quite the whole picture. There is evidence that very high volumes of endurance training, the kind that ultramarathon runners and Ironman triathletes do, can cause changes to the heart muscle and episodes of significant oxidative stress. I've made a separate video on exactly this. For virtually everyone watching this, more cardio genuinely means a longer life. It's only at the extreme athlete end that the question marks begin to appear. Think of your cardiovascular system like a river network supplying a city. Cardio is what widens the channels, strengthens the banks, and keeps the water flowing efficiently to every part of the city. A city with narrow, weak channels runs short cells, don't get what they need. Waste builds up. Systems start to fail quietly. The river network that cardio builds is what keeps the whole city alive. Now here is where I want to reframe the entire question you came here with. Because framing this as a competition misses the point entirely. Cardio wins the single event medal. But the studies that looked at people who combine all three, rather than just choosing one, tell a completely different story. In that same 2022 body of research, combining resistance training with aerobic exercise was associated with around a 40% lower risk of death from any cause. Not the 15% from weights alone. Not the 35% from cardio alone. 40%. The benefits didn't add, they multiplied. Go back to the four processes. Cardio builds the oxygen engine and drives cardiovascular fitness. Resistance training preserves the muscle and structural strength that keeps you upright, independent, and metabolically healthy. HIIT sharpens fitness even further and supercharges insulin sensitivity in a fraction of the time. Each one covers a weakness that the others leave exposed. Cardio alone leaves you fit but potentially frail. Weights alone leave you strong, but sometimes breathless. No single approach protects against all four killers at once, but together they form something very close to complete cover. Here is what I would build if time was no obstacle. 2 to 3 sessions of steady cardio per week, running, cycling, brisk walking as the foundation. 2 proper resistance sessions on top of that, training the major muscle groups to hold off sarcopenia for the decades ahead. And 1 short HIIT session per week, just a handful of hard intervals to squeeze the most out of my VO2 max. That is the minimum I would recommend for someone with time to spare. Not a ceiling. In the ER, the patients I see who age the best are not the ones who picked a side in this debate. They are the ones who simply kept moving in multiple ways, consistently, for decades. Not perfectly, not obsessively, just consistently. And if this is new to you, the idea that exercise works through specific biological mechanisms that you can actually understand and target, then this channel has a lot more where that came from. Subscribe if you want to keep thinking this way. It means more than you know. So which exercise keeps you alive longest? The answer is cardio. The research is clear, and it has been for decades. But the prize, the real prize, goes to the person who stops asking which one wins and simply does all three. Every week. Not because they are disciplined, because they understand what is at stake. Your future self is being built right now, in the choices that feel completely inconsequential today. Not the dramatic ones, the quiet ones. The walk you took or didn't take. The set of squats you did or skipped. The 20 minutes on a bike felt like nothing. That future self, the one who still climbs stairs without thinking, who gets down on the floor with their grandchildren and stands back up unaided, who walks into a room at 75 and still feels like themselves, is not built by picking the right exercise. They are built by the person who understood why and started before they had to. I'm Dr. Miles. Thanks for watching.